So today we're looking at chapters 9 and 10. And if you remember from yesterday, chapter 8 kind of ended with Paul talking about the food sacrificed to idols. And some people have a conscience that allows them to eat it, and others have a conscience that doesn't allow them to eat it. And as we move into 9, he's talking about the same thing. And he says that he actually gives up his right, that he has a conscience that allows him to eat meat or to not eat meat. But depending on who he's around, he'll use his freedom or not. Sometimes we like to think that we have freedom to do whatever we want. But Paul is teaching us here to use our freedom to serve other people, that we have the freedom to say yes or no in different situations based off of who we're with. He also gives up the freedom to take money from this church. The Bible actually tells us to pay our pastors, to pay those who preach and teach the gospel. But Paul is saying, because of the dynamics of this church, he's saying, I'm not going to take money from you because you will think I'm in it with a corrupt motive, that I'm trying to just preach the gospel to make a profit. And so he actually gives up his right to get paid as a pastor for a season among this church. Look at chapter 9, verse 15. He says, "But I have made no use of any of these rights, nor am I writing these things to secure any such provision." He's saying, I'm not making use of my rights to eat meat or to get money, because I care more about your salvation than I do about exercising my freedom to eat and to get paid. And then in verse 19, he says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them." He's saying that I'm using my freedom to actually serve other people. I am binding my conscience, in a sense, to their own conscience, so that I could be on the same turf as them, the same ground as them, and whatever they're convicted about or convinced about, I will meet them there so that we can have reasonable conversations and so that I can meet them on their turf, essentially. And then I love how he ends chapter 9. He talks about just living with purpose. Look at verses 24 through 27. He says, "Do you not know that all," and in this context, there was a lot of like Olympic type of events, a lot of running, in the city of Corinth, there was a high athletic competition. And so he uses this running analogy. He says, "Do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one receives the prize, so that you may run so that you may obtain it? Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I might myself be disqualified." He's saying, I live my life with purpose. I run with purpose. I proclaim Jesus, and I want to make sure that I'm falling in line with the things that Jesus teaches. So when I teach you about sexual ethic, I myself am disciplining my body to follow the biblical sexual ethic. When I teach you about a different conscience and eating or not eating meat sacrificed to idols, I'm disciplining my own body and my own decisions to make decisions in line with the truth of what I've taught you. When I talk about giving up our freedom or giving up our rights to love and serve others, I myself am doing that, because if I don't, I'm disqualified and I can't preach the gospel, and my life won't have purpose. That is the purpose and the meaning of life, is to proclaim the gospel, to love God, to glorify God, and love other people. And that's actually what he gets into then in chapter 10. He talks about idolatry. In chapter 10, he starts by talking about the story of Moses and the Israelites and them in the wilderness and their sin and their idolatry. They built idols with their hands. They also worshiped created things rather than God. And so Paul is here warning the church to not give in to idolatry. Look at verses 12 through 14 of chapter 10. He says, "Therefore, lest anyone think that he stands, take heed lest he falls." This is where we get the term pride comes before the fall. He's saying, don't become proud. Sometimes they would look at the Israelites and the Israelites as they came out of Egypt, and they had all of this idolatry, and they would judge them and think that they're better than them. And he's saying, don't get proud, because pride comes before the fall. Verse 13, he says, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man." All the temptations that you feel have been felt by mankind for all of our existence. But he says, "God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it." So it's saying you won't be tempted beyond what you can handle. God will provide a way out. A lot of people here ask, what is the way out? Well, we're actually told in the next verse 14, he says, "Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry." The way out of temptation is to run from temptation. God gives us the ability to say no, and he calls us to run. And like Paul has said at the end of chapter 9, to discipline ourselves, to discipline our body, to fall in line with a biblical sexual ethic, with the biblical use of freedom, with the biblical call for us to love God and love neighbor above ourselves. And then towards the end of chapter 10, so 10 talks about idolatry and loving God more than anything created by God or created by human hands. Those are kind of the two categories for idols. One is something that humans create with their own hands and then they worship it. Other idolatries are good gifts of God that we make ultimate gifts, like we could worship sex, we could worship money, we could worship friendship, we could worship food, we can worship drink. These are all good gifts from God, but they're not to be worshiped. They're creations that are meant to point us to the Creator. And I love how he closes out then here, chapter 10, and he says, so whatever you eat or drink, whatever you do all for the glory of God. It's all about God. Sexual pleasure is about God. Eating and drinking is about God. Using our freedom to love others or abstaining from our freedom to do what we want to love others, that's all about the glory of God. And he's saying, live your life in a way where it glorifies God, where it shows love to others, and you're concerned with the kingdom of God. And then he closes out the very last line of chapter 10 is, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. So he's saying, I live my life in such a way that you can follow my example. And that's some of what we see in this book.